Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody, or maybe good morning, nobody. It's Tuesday, January 16th, 2024, and, much of the country blanketed in snow, or at least much of the country outside my window. That's the most I can see. We got a considerable amount of snow here, and further away is Netroots Radio World Headquarters all the way across on the other side of the country, and apparently having some difficulty with the internets and the various tubes that function in it. And I guess the tubes are on strike or something like that, and we're honoring the picket line. I don't know exactly what's happening. We may be streaming, maybe not streaming. I don't know, but we'll record for your podcasting convenience later in the day. But we might be depriving those of you who listen live each day of your morning fix, and you won't be getting my explanation of why you're not getting it right now. You know how it is. At this point, I would ring the service bell and tell production assistant that he needs to text out, tweet out, social media out. I can't really easily move into adopting the language of Blue Sky or Mastodon tooting or skeeting or whatever. They really need to come up with a better word for it here. But letting everybody know. So, Scott Anderson doesn't believe we're on, and that's because he believes in objective reality. So, all right, well, around half an hour from now, I can send that message out myself and let everybody know. And in the meantime, all I can do is record as if you were listening live, and maybe the show will trip over and, the switches will flip, and everything will turn on and just start in the middle of the show, at which point you will enter in to find out that Donald Trump won the Iowa caucuses yesterday. That did happen. It was expected to happen. He apparently smells terrible and won everybody's vote, and that's maybe the reason that he's not doing any of the retail politics there. I don't know. As soon as Darth gets back from winter hibernation, I intend to beg for Photoshop work on every picture of Donald Trump that comes out so that there's those green wavy stink lines emanating from him and everybody gets the picture that way. Anyway, yes, he did win. The answer on who came in second is apparently Ron DeSantis, but everybody's talking about, to the extent that anybody's talking about anybody other than Trump, everybody's talking about Nikkki Haley, who came in third. And I don't know whether that, what we were discussing yesterday with Greg, that maybe the person who comes in third has it better because they can just exit the race and leave, although I'm not really certain what the benefit of an easy exit actually is, other than getting rid of the headache of having to try to run for president unsuccessfully. And you can't even run for vice president in this case because Trump hates everybody who ever runs against him, even if they run against him by pretending they're actually supportive of him and being afraid of his voters and afraid of his base, and never say anything but something nice-ish about him. It doesn't matter. You put your name on the same ballot as me. You might take away votes from me. I therefore hate you and can't make you my vice president. Although, on the other hand, I attempt to hang my vice president, so why not choose from among you? But anyway, he just doesn't work that way. So apparently, I think he not only won the caucuses, but swept every county in Iowa. But let's see, the other narratives coming out, I really didn't bother to read too much. Because honestly, what are you going to do with this information, right? That he won the caucuses. The things I saw people chatting about were that apparently, it was freezing cold, and attendance was way down as well. And I think I saw somebody mention that it was only a fraction, it was lower turnout for the Republican caucuses last night than the Democrats got for their last caucus in 2020 in Iowa, which is weird because Iowa is kind of a Republican state. So it was extremely, seems like extremely low turnout. not that that matters and not that it would have affected the outcome. I mean, Trump has the most support in Iowa. It was going to happen that way, high turnout or low turnout. But it does help explain some things, like apparently they were very big on hyping their polling from last night, finding that 2/3 of caucus goers were of the opinion that Joe Biden had not been legitimately elected to office in 2020. But just, I guess if Greg were here, he would remind you this is 2/3 of the less than 20% of Iowa Republicans who bothered to show up for the caucus. So you're going to have pretty hardcore Trump supporters or people who really want to lean on that excuse for being a Trump supporter coming out for this thing. It was also noted by some other caucus watchers that the model predicted low turnout well before they found out about the weather factor, so that it might have been extremely low turnout had it been a glorious evening and travel that much easier. But apparently the weather wasn't the leading driver in this person's view of the low turnout. It was simply, well, it's all a foregone conclusion, and we don't care very much about it. And then there was the information we got yesterday prior to the caucuses about the numbers of people who said they intended to come out to caucus for Nikkki Haley and who nonetheless said, I believe that Trump will win the nomination, at which point I will vote for Joe Biden, which was kind of an interesting addition as well. All right. Well, I would tell all of you who are texting me now that you can't connect to Netroots Radio that, I know that, and that now is not the time for me to answer your text, except with the exception, I'll say an exception for Scott Anderson, because he's supposed to be listening for business purposes. But as for the rest of you, yes, Netroots Radio is off the air. I am aware of that, and I am not going to stop recording the show to text that to you, only for you to discover that later on anyway. At 9:30, everyone will get their notice. Yes, I got you. Okay, well, anyway, everybody, wanting to pitch in with the help there. Okay, so on to what we've got packed away for you for analysis for the day. Maybe because it's a podcast-only day, we can dive into some of the weird stories that I had set aside, because if you were tuning in to hear the news, well, you're going to have to tune somewhere else for now to pick it up. And, what can I tell you? You'll get that information from elsewhere, and we can give you the weird stories that you might not have heard about yet. All right, let's see. There were a couple of things. Oh, here's one that I forgot to tell you really quickly yesterday. When I was doing a courtroom roundup of the Trump and Trump-related cases, I haven't seen this one reported out, article length here yet, but what are you going to write, I guess? But I should look around. But once again, the ubiquitous Joshua Friedman, who also specializes in, I guess, maintaining a Twitter account and then going over there and screen capturing outrageous things or things that are of interest that haven't happened at Blue Sky and importing them over into Blue Sky. He's really found a niche for himself there. We have the tweets from Katie Fang, who I would go and look up and tell you exactly who she is, except, like I said, it's a screenshot, and I can't do it. But Katie Fang, I guess, in the courtroom for Giuliani's latest appearance in the courtroom. Where was that happening? I don't know. Well, maybe I should go over and find out. I do still have the Twitter account. There's no, I haven't gotten rid of it yet, mostly because I haven't been providing any content on Twitter if I can help it. But mostly I have it to go back and see when I get pick up new followers in Blue Sky. I say, did I have interactions with this person or whatever back in the old bad place? And if so, then I'll follow along and return the follow. And otherwise, I'll wait for some other better objective evidence that it's a good idea to follow back, because you never know. And I don't want to just follow everybody back, because sometimes you get weirdo trolls who are following you so that they can make your life hell. So you want to be a little bit careful. Katie Fang, though, if you have like any knowledge of anything you probably knew offhand, is the host of the Katie Fang show. That probably we could have guessed, but it's on MSNBC, so it's a real show, and I wasn't really sure about that. Like, I'm the host of my show, you're the host of your show, but we're just like regular people normally. But not Katie Fang. She's a media personality, also an anchor and legal contributor at MSNBC and across the NBC brands, I guess. So let's see. This would have been back in last week, right? So, all right. Well, anyway, the upshot of it was, let's see, when did I get it? This was 3 days ago. So maybe I should search for Katie Fang and Giuliani, because I would like to know if there's more also, even though this was supposed to be a quick hit. We have to turn it into something extremely long here. We'll look for the latest on her reporting from on Giuliani. I guess so. I'm not certain where this was, but I think I'm seeing reactions to what I had seen. All right, let's zip back. Anyway, the first of these tweets is from January 12th. Okay, so Judge McAfee. So that is Georgia, right? Okay. Now up, she was saying, Giuliani's double jeopardy motion. So he, like Trump, was trying to push through a dismissal motion based on the idea of double jeopardy, which, of course, we remember that Trump was trying to say that his impeachment trial was his first trial, and that prosecuting him in Article 3 courts was double jeopardy because he had once been bothered about something similar somewhere else. Giuliani, of course, not impeached. He didn't hold public office at the time, and there was nothing to impeach him from. So you might wonder, what are you talking about? What was the first jeopardy? Now, he's been in court proceedings before. He's been sued. He's been charged with other things in other states by the federal government elsewhere. He's had his phones seized in investigations of various kinds. But, I mean, I guess so that the judge was right in asking, what the hell are you talking about? So he's making a double jeopardy motion. His lawyer says, though, he's concerned, of course, that other states could prosecute Giuliani for these same acts and could trigger double jeopardy. Which, right away, you have to imagine, well, this is an issue? I mean, you're saying another state could charge you later and bring charges, and you're worried that would be double jeopardy. Well, one, it wouldn't be. But two, what if it was? Like, this is the first jeopardy. There's no such thing as saying, well, someone else could do this to me later, so you have to dismiss this one. Well, if we dismiss this one, then they can charge you. That's fine. But never mind, because even that isn't double jeopardy. And the problem is that the judge says, hey, how does it become double jeopardy issue if all the states are separate sovereigns? Couldn't you be convicted in every single state without any double jeopardy concerns whatsoever? And that's actually true. And prompts maybe one of the best, just, I don't know, deadpan responses. Giuliani's lawyer responds, you may have a point there. You may. Yeah, that's the point. And that's all that Katie Fang gives to the whole thing. The next tweet in that thread is, the hearings have now concluded for the day, which is kind of amazing. So let's see. The first one was from 3:36 p.m., January 12th, and the hearings have concluded was 3:40. So no wonder there's just not much written up about it. So there you go. Rudy Giuliani, not the only idiot in that courtroom representing Rudy's interests. He also hired someone professionally who turned out to be an idiot to argue for his interests. And wow, it's about as bad as you would have expected. So, well, what can you do? Not a brilliant man. neither of them there. I don't know who the lawyer is, but wow. Anyway, I just wanted to share that one with you. And before turning to other issues that I'd put aside, I really should have, and I don't know, I guess everything will still be working when it comes around to Joan McCarter time. She won't be depending on listening to the live stream to figure out whether we're there. I think she'll just call regularly, so everything should be good. But I need to figure out where we are on government shutdown. Last week we were reading that a deal had been reached, and then we read just as quickly that Republican extremists were going to hold out and try to blow up the deal no matter what, and that everyone, all the usual suspects, this time including murdery traitor Green, were going to look to vacate the chair and kick Mike Johnson out of the speakership because he made a deal with Democrats. It's a somewhat interesting dynamic this time, given that murdery traitor Green, who everybody ordinarily would have thought would have been one of the rabble-rousers looking to kick Kevin McCarthy out of the chair for making a deal with Democrats to operate the federal government and adopt continuing resolutions, etc. She threw her lot in with Kevin McCarthy in hopes that, I guess, she would get some sort of formal power and start climbing the leadership ladder. And then, he got bounced. She found herself without a base. And anyway, she now says she herself might even threatens now to make the motion to vacate the chair and kick Mike Johnson out of the speakership for doing that thing she previously supported Kevin McCarthy for doing. So you can see that she's probably, I don't know, seems like she's losing her juice certainly inside the Republican caucus in the House, and people are beginning to recognize, her desperation and what her game is and how she just wants to center herself and everything, and they all want to center themselves. And I guess it's not going to work very well, but, she's still, one person has the power to make those motions to vacate the chair. And there are certainly some people who were consistent about this and who said they were angry about compromise with Democrats in order to get something passed last time and will be just as angry this time, whether or not they'll go through the trouble of vacating the chair or simply blow up the deal and close the government and let the chips fall where they may. We will have to see. And maybe we can check in with Joan later on and find out exactly where we are on that. And maybe during one of the breaks we can grab the latest on all this. It's funny. They're just not talking about it very much. And Iowa has, even though the outcome was a foregone conclusion, has kind of erased everything else for the time being. Okay, let's see. Other things that I wanted to share with you, there were several, and some older things, some other takes on 14th Amendment stuff, things that have nothing to do with that whatsoever, general, what are we going to do about the collapse of our democracy, and a few other smattering of items. Let's see. We have, I got to open up one or two of these. Yes. One, I guess, I wanted to share was Liz Dye's piece for Public Notice. That's Aaron Rupar's publication, covering the close of the New York State fraud trial where Judge Engoron was presiding. Oh, I did see an alternative pronunciation for Engoron as Engoron being floated somewhere. Probably should check into that. But the coverage here is of his attempt at a closing argument. We heard that it didn't go particularly well, but that it did go, even though it shouldn't have, which was of some interest. This time covered under the title of Trump Trolls New York Court en route to epic loss. That is coming, of course. His courtroom tantrum was a work, one that could cost him a lot of money. I thought that might be of some interest to listen to. On Wednesday of last week, of course, after a series of increasingly inappropriate emails from Trump's lawyers, Justice Arthur Engoron, we'll try that one out, blocked the former president from delivering closing remarks in his New York civil fraud trial, but just not very effectively, I guess, because in retrospect, it's clear that the entire exchange was a part of an elaborate troll that allowed Trump to win a news cycle with an in-court outburst, but would only have harmed his case in the long run by serving as evidence of his total lack of repentance after years of passing off fraudulent financial documents. But as it turned out, Trump got his mic drop moment anyway. Before we get to Trump's Thursday courtroom outburst, let's go back to January 3rd, please. Let's do that. And a routine scheduling email from Engoron's law clerk, and remember how much they hate her. The evidentiary phase of the trial to determine the fate of Trump's eponymous business wrapped last month, leaving only closing arguments scheduled for January 11th. The clerk wanted to nail down the specifics with both sides. In a perfectly normal professional response, attorney Kevin Wallace said that he would speak for approximately an hour, on behalf, there's where the half came from, of the New York Attorney General. Fair enough. But then Chris Kise, the lead attorney representing Donald Trump, replied that he and his co-counsels, Alina Habba and Cliff Robert, we forget about that guy, would address the court, and so would the defendant. And here embedded is that email. Happy New Year. By the way, Chris Kise seems to be either without a shift key or just in the habit of skipping it entirely. Nothing is capitalized anywhere at all, including the name, as we pointed out last week, the name President Trump. But okay, Happy New Year. He starts at this time. The defense anticipates that closing arguments will take approximately 2 hours to 2 hours and 15 minutes total. I will present the more extensive argument, and then Ms. Habba and Mr. Robert will also present more limited arguments. Additionally, he also doesn't space between paragraphs, by the way. President Trump plans to present argument at closing as well, but we anticipate all such arguments will be completed within the above time estimate. As a practical matter, this means the defense will be done before lunch break, leaving ample time for the Attorney General for the remainder of the day. Please advise if you have any further questions. Thank you, Chris Kise. It was a deliberately informal message, devoid of a single capital letter. In fact, perhaps he donated them all to his boss. I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean, but okay. And it had the intended effect. Oh, yes, he does use excessive. Okay, well, within hours, the AG's office responded in a furious but still professional email protesting that under New York law, if a party appears by attorney, such party may not act in person in the action except by consent of the court. In plain English, you have a right to represent yourself in court, but if you do hire a lawyer, you can't just jump in and pinch hit anytime you feel like it. This is a standard rule across most jurisdictions to prevent parties from essentially testifying before the court and the jury without being, well, there was none here, but without being forced to undergo cross-examination. That's the key there. Kise, the former Solicitor General of Florida, who successfully argued multiple cases before the U.S. Supreme Court, knows this perfectly well. But the $3 million that Trump's Save America PAC paid Kise to leave his job at the white shoe law firm of Foley and Lardner appears to have also secured his services as the court jester, and so he was apparently happy to feign ignorance of this basic rule. As the prosecutors noted, Trump was entitled to testify in his own defense and backed out at the last minute, shouting that he'd, and here's all the capital letters, very successfully and conclusively testified on cross-examination and had nothing more to say other than this is a complete and total election interference, parentheses, Biden campaign, witch hunt. Okay, all caps there. That's why. The donation joke. When he did testify during the prosecution's case, he shouted at the judge, attempted to introduce evidence on the witness stand, and attacked the attorney general personally. And when he was forced to go under oath after publicly attacking court staff in defiance of the gag order, Judge Engoron found Trump's testimony not credible and fined him $10,000. The court has already found that Mr. Trump is prone to giving irrelevant speeches, lacks self-control, is evasive in responding to questions, and has repeatedly violated court orders for which he has been sanctioned, prosecutors urged. Allowing Mr. Trump to present closing argument will invite more speeches that will unduly disrupt the proceedings. Nonetheless, On January 5th, Justice Engoron replied that he was, quote, inclined to let everyone have his or her say and would grant the request if Trump would agree to limit his subjects to what is permissible in a counsel's closing argument, that is, commentary on the relevant material facts that are in evidence and application of the relevant law to those facts. There is an embedded clip from his letter saying as much. 4 days later, Kise thanked the judge for his response and proposal, but complained that forcing Trump to play by the same rules as his own lawyers was fraught with ambiguities, and directed the court to advise as to whether you will permit President Trump to speak at closing without the proposed limitations. Well, probably not. But in the end, yes, right? Treating an order by a judge as a proposal, it was wildly inappropriate, and the email was clearly an attempt to provoke a denial by the court. But in the event, Engoron replied evenly that his parameters were not subject to further debate. Take it or leave it, he concluded. Please let me know by 4 p.m. today. We all remembered all that, and he didn't get a response. And then later on, Kise finally responding to the judge saying, I didn't get a response to you, so I assume he's not speaking, said, oh, I didn't see your deadline. That's a good one. I like that one. And breezily added that he'd like to get back to the court in the morning of January 10th, one day before the scheduled hearing. And later that night, citing the death of Trump's mother-in-law, that's convenient, Kise requested a 3-week delay of the entire hearing. At the time of Kise's email, of course, Trump was in the midst of his nightly social media bender, and he did manage, even in his grief, to do a scheduled town hall with Fox's Martha McCallum and Bret Baier in Iowa Wednesday night. So, yeah, that didn't work out all that well. Not very convincing to the judge. And, well, we'll get to the exciting conclusion and move on from there. But next, 2 minutes of frantic texting for me. See you later. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Welcome back to no one, because, of course, stream's still not working, but I got all my texts off to everybody. Joan is up and looking for the stream as well, and she likes to listen in and see what we're talking about before she comes in. But hey, if it kicks in between now and then, you'll be in good shape. Otherwise, what the heck? We can do it cold. All right, well, I was scanning through the rest of this article here about Trump's appearance last week in the fraud trial, and I'm not so certain. I think the promise ahead of my reading of it was we might find out a little something about what it could cost him in the end. But, or to get some specifics about would that make it worse for him when it came time to pass sentence, such as it was. It's not a criminal trial, but settling on damages and just how much it would cost him in payments to the state, disgorgements of profit from his companies. But I'm not certain that there's any real figure offered up other than that he may be fined along the way for his courtroom antics. So I don't know. I mean, this is a very entertaining retelling of it, certainly, but I'm not certain that there's anything much that's in here that's revealing, that's new. I also was hoping for maybe some explanation of, or maybe we can skip down and get a retelling of just what it looked like to observers when the judge ended up having to just sit there in frustration and watch Trump rant in defiance of all of his orders. But let's see if we can get down to that point. Then, right, we left off with Trump trying to get out of the whole thing by saying his mother-in-law died, which she apparently has. But while offering his condolences, Justice Engoron denied the request to postpone the hearing, noting that every appearance of Mr. Trump requires court officers, court clerks, administrators, security details, technical people, etc. to rearrange their schedules and plan for the day. At this point, Kise resorted to open defiance, telling the court that despite the fact that his mother-in-law, who he was very close to, passed away late last night, President Trump will be speaking tomorrow. And that one has capitalization and everything. In fact, he capitalized not only all the proper places, but also capitalized the M in L in mother-in-law, and then of course everything. Well, you know, it's properly. Other than that, I don't think you have to. Anyway, doesn't matter. Plenty of capitalization, so it's a little bit. I think there was speculation when we read it last week that though it is signed Chris as opposed to Chris Kise, which is what he signed it last time. Is it really possible that that Kise would let Trump email the judge from his account and say it was him? That does seem unlikely. More likely, he maybe handed his phone to an assistant and dictated the response, and the assistant uses capital letters. Anyway, let's see. Even this flagrant misbehavior, it says, failed to produce an angry denial, with the court simply repeating that the former president would have to agree to the stated preconditions, and so Kise was finally forced to resort to the equivalent of 2 middle fingers to achieve the desired outcome, emailing, "This is very unfair, Your Honor. You are not allowing President Trump, who has been wrongfully demeaned and belittled by an out-of-control, politically motivated attorney general, to speak out about things that must be spoken about." Remember that one? That appears to finally have done the trick, with Justice Engoron replying testily, "Take it or leave it, now or never. You have until noon. 7 minutes from now, I will not grant any further extensions." Having gotten what he wanted, if that was it, Kise never replied. The court sent one final email noting that Trump will not be speaking in court tomorrow, and Trump paraded his trophy denial on social media, and again in all caps. "I would like to personally do the closing argument on the civil trial where the Trump-hating judge and attorney general are all working closely together to screw me." That's in scare quotes, I guess. "Even though I have done nothing wrong," Trump screamed on social media, on Truth Social, you know, his little place, Wednesday evening, attaching a conveniently cropped screenshot of the judge's order. Okay, that was not the end of the matter. Trump showed up yesterday morning telling reporters that he hoped to address the judge, and embedded his Aaron's video of him titled that Trump whines on the way in to New York City closing statements. And sure enough, with just 6 minutes left in the allotted time for the defense's closing arguments, Kise requested that Trump be able to speak. This was clearly the prearranged cue for Trump's final stunt. The judge responded by asking if the defendant intended to abide by the court's parameters, but without agreeing, Trump launched into an ad hominem attack on the prosecutors, New York law, and, of course, the judge himself. The financial statements were perfect. There were no witnesses against us. The banks got paid back. The banks are as happy as can be. There's no fraud. What's happened here, sir, is a fraud on me, Trump ranted. According to the Daily Beast, this is a political witch hunt. We should receive damages for what we've gone through. Oh, yeah. The court stared more or less impassively as Trump rambled on, When told the allotted time was up, Trump stormed out, content that he's gotten his mic drop and won another news cycle, and then held a news conference and whined some more. But this little stunt won't help him with the court as it deliberates on the $370 million fine requested by the AG. If anything, it will be cited as evidence of Trump's continuing refusal to take responsibility for his crimes and likelihood of repeating them if allowed to regain control of his real estate holdings. And if so, that will be some very expensive trolling. The end. And that was some very expensive reading now that I think about it. I don't know. I thought we were going to get more on that one, but apparently not. I should have scanned it a little more closely ahead of time. So where will we go next? Well, let's see. There are a couple of different directions that I could suggest. And how about we just pick one at random here? This one I thought was a little worrisome, but should be on the record. And this, I should note at the outset, not news, and a good portion perhaps of what we do today will not be news until we get to Joan McCarter's section here, but recirculated recently on social media in response to, well, you'll see, it's fairly relevant for a number of reasons, but this written in March of 2022, March 13th, 2022, a Washington Post piece, contribution from Stephen A. West, who is, or at least was at the time, an associate professor of history at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., where he is writing a book about the history of the 15th Amendment, not the 14th, the 15th Amendment, in American memory and political culture. Now, why is that especially important, American memory and political culture? What he's writing here, it comes under the title of What History Says About the January 6th Committee Investigation. Remember, this is a year ago, so he's well ahead of the curve in pointing this out. The importance of an unambiguous report that can't be weaponized by Trump supporters. That January 6th committee report is what he's got in mind. But, and so he's pointing out that they took the right tack on this thing, and in the structure of the committee, particularly, as he points out later, when Pelosi denies including the right to include trolling Republicans on the body of the committee itself to make mischief there, and there's good historical reason for having done that. On the other hand, there's also good historical precedent for watch out for, I guess, when people tell you, well, history will judge him. I mean, that's basically the rough equivalent of saying, well, let the 14th Amendment, let the voters decide. Well, let's not even let voters decide. Let's just let the future people decide what history will say about him. And, of course, that will vary greatly depending on what we do now. Like if we leave behind no historical record and say, well, history will judge. Well, history will probably think that we didn't think it was any big deal. But let's run through this article quickly. In a court filing in early March, and remember, this is last year, lawyers for the committee investigating the January 6th Capitol insurrection, and they use that word, charged that former President Donald Trump and key allies engaged in two potential crimes, conspiring to defraud the United States and obstructing an official congressional proceeding. The claim is the latest chapter in the extensive and ongoing congressional investigation into the insurrection and offers some early clues as to the committee's thinking and what its eventual report will look like. If history is any guide, that report will be an incredibly important document after the Civil War, and we did get it, we have it now, we know exactly what the contents are, but I think this question still is relevant, even though we know the contents of the report. How will history view it? That is the interesting question. After the Civil War, defeated ex-Confederates turned to terrorism to limit the possibilities of freedom for formerly enslaved people. The violence only grew after black men won the right to vote. Congressional Republicans, members of the party of Abraham Lincoln, way back when, emancipation, yes, black men's enfranchisement, responded by forming a joint House-Senate committee to investigate, quote, the execution of the laws and the safety of the lives and property of the citizens of the United States in the former Confederate States. Its report submitted 150 years ago, holds sobering lessons for the January 6th committee about what comes next. That is, how such an inquiry can succeed or fail in influencing policy and in shaping later understandings of a perilous chapter in a nation's history. Republicans outnumbered Democrats 13-8 on the Joint Select Committee to inquire into the condition of affairs in the late insurrectionary states, popularly known as the Ku Klux Committee, which is interesting. Had they not settled on the use of the word Klan in that one, or was that a joke, the Ku Klux Committee? But they didn't use a K for that one. But anyway, I guess back in the day, I guess whenever they decided on the name of the Ku Klux Klan, like Ku Klux must have meant something, and historians probably know what it is, and I've probably read it in Wikipedia once upon a time, and I've forgotten, and anyway, accounts for the way this committee was named popularly. At any rate, this committee, named after the secret terrorist organization, obviously, responsible for much of the violence. The Democratic minority, however, included racist and outspoken opponents of Reconstruction. One was Senator Francis Blair Jr. of Missouri, who had once denounced African Americans as an, quote, alien race of semi-barbarous men. Yow. Republicans did their best to uncover the Klan's goals and the extent of its terrorism, but Democrats on the committee rejected the proceedings from the outset, creating a partisan spectacle. They worked to put biracial democracy itself on trial, badgering and belittling black witnesses and calling white witnesses to complain of the incompetence and venality of officials whom black voters helped elect. The committee's reports and supporting evidence totaled 13 volumes, more than 8,000 pages, at the time the longest published congressional investigation in history. It contained the testimony from 600 witnesses, about 1/3 of them African Americans, who told of violent assaults and murders, rapes, and arson committed by the Klan. The report from the Republican majority highlighted harrowing stories of political terror, including the account of Elias Hill, a disabled teacher, Baptist minister, and grassroots political leader who was brutally beaten outside his South Carolina home by 6 Klansmen. The Democratic minority, however, submitted its own report, shot through with racist and inflammatory language. It denounced, quote, Negro supremacy, and called the enfranchisement of black men, quote, one of the most terrible blunders ever committed, unquote. Democrats minimized the Klan's, quote, alleged outrages, claiming that the Klan was not a political force and thus could not be responsible for political terrorism, but simultaneously excusing Klan violence as a just political response. Quote, the legitimate offspring, unquote, of Republican power in the South. In the short term, in other words, the original "you made me a Nazi," in the short term, little came of the investigation. That's the interesting part. The Republican majority recommended extending an existing law that allowed the president to suspend the writ of habeas corpus to effect mass arrests. President Ulysses S. Grant had put it to good use a few months earlier, employing the U.S. Army to help quash terrorism in South Carolina, but with a presidential election approaching, congressional Republicans chose instead to moderate their approach on the Southern question and let that provision lapse. It was a step in the National Republican Party's retreat from Reconstruction and weakened the federal government's ability to respond to future violence. In the longer term, the Democrats' minority report served as a kind of rough draft for the, quote, tragic era interpretation of Reconstruction that cast white Southern Democrats as victims and black and white Republicans as imbeciles and villains. This view took firm root in historical scholarship. This is the interesting part here, and led to a lot of discussion over the weekend in one of the stories I recommended reading yesterday. The Dunning School, named after Columbia University historian William Dunning and his graduate students, portrayed black men as unfit voters and radical Reconstruction as a national failure. In Reconstruction, Political and Economic, that's the title of a 1907 paper, Dunning cited the Klan report as proof that the Reconstruction-era governments of the South were in, quote, all the states bad, and in some of them a mere travesty of civilized government, unquote. Black witnesses like Hill disappeared in Dunning's account. The tragic era mythology is also pervaded American popular culture, providing a useful narrative for justifying the Jim Crow laws, codes, and racist ideas that limited the economic, political, and social advancement of black Americans. For instance, white supremacist Thomas Dixon touted his research in the Congressional Klan report as proof of the historical accuracy of The Klansman, his 1905 novel glorifying the Ku Klux Klan. By the way, he spells it with a C, just in case you were wondering or looking for it yourself. It reached the silver screen in 1915 as, you know it, D.W. Griffith's blockbuster silent film, The Birth of a Nation. The film's racist plot turned on the Klan's lynching of a black man who attempted to rape a white woman, the kind of behavior that Hill's attackers falsely accused him of inciting. The voices of Hill and other black witnesses, to be sure, were never entirely silenced. W.E.B. Du Bois included an account of Hill's testimony in his 1935 work, Black Reconstruction in America. Many white scholars at the time ignored Du Bois' work, but the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, called a second Reconstruction by some, drove a reconsideration of the period. Historians adopted Du Bois' emphasis on the centrality of the black experience, an agency during the Civil War and Reconstruction. In 2017, Hill was honored with a wayside marker near his former home in York County, the first state marker in South Carolina to reference the Klan and its Reconstruction-era reign of terror. That was 2017, once again. Still, signs of the tragic era view of Reconstruction remain. A study by the Zinn Education Project found its vestiges in the curriculums of more than 12 states, which is, I think, the mention of this article grew out of the discussion surrounding and the shock surrounding Nikkki Haley's assertion that the Civil War was about something other than slavery somehow. How did this come to pass? There's a couple articles we ought to read about that. For much of the last 150 years, Reconstruction's critics trivialized black witnesses' testimonies in the Klan report and used it instead to discredit the period's democratic possibilities. Can the January 6th committee protect its work against such willful and perverse misreadings? House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, back in her time, took one step when she rejected 2 of the 5 Republican appointees to the committee, leading House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy to withdraw the rest. As a result, the January 6th inquiry does not have what the Ku Klux Committee had, a minority that sympathizes with the goals, if not the tactics, but yes, the tactics, of violent insurrectionists. That has not, of course, stopped Trump's supporters from criticizing the investigation as a partisan witch hunt or perpetuating the big lie, but it means they can't use the committee's investigative resources to do so, nor will they be able to write that version of events into the committee's final report, the kind of official record favored by historians. In a larger sense, however, there are no guarantees of how future generations will read this or any other historical evidence. The misuses of the Klan report arose not from any fault of the investigators or the witnesses, but from the nation's abandonment of the promise of Reconstruction. The reactionary and racist tendencies of the late 19th century gave birth to the Jim Crow era, which white Americans justified in the stories they told about the post-Civil War years. If we might find some comfort in the reassessment of Reconstruction over recent decades, the hard truth is that it took a long time. The ultimate, if unsettling, lesson of the Klan report is that it gives the lie to platitudes that history will judge, and the evidence speaks for itself. It's a lesson to bear in mind about the work of the January 6th committee, too. That is a little bit worrisome, isn't it? Now, that led me, as I said, to a lot of other reading that was of some interest, some of which I included in yesterday's roundup. And I'll have to, and I must have archived the one I read over the weekend that I mentioned to you. Maybe we should dive into that one. Where is that one, though? I feel like this should have been more readily findable, but I think we looked at, maybe it's hidden behind one or another of the weird tiles that they use for this in Pocket. All right, so what I'll do is I have an alternate plan. Hold on a second. I know I sent this one to Scott yesterday in the links, and somewhere there was the piece I had with the miseducation, I think it was, of Nikkki Haley. Is this the one? Let's see. I'll have to open it up and see. Yep. Right. What Nikkki Haley and I learned at a segregation academy. This guest essay opinion piece from Elizabeth Spears in the New York Times at the end of, I guess it must have been over the weekend on Sunday, which I thought was a good look ahead, perhaps, at what might, what they're warning about here about the January 6th report and the way that the Dunning School influenced things in the modern era. Elizabeth Spears here writes, after her failure to identify slavery as the cause of the Civil War generated a wave of criticism last month, Nikkki Haley assured her potential constituents that she had black friends. Oh, goodness. And that she understood the war's origins. She said that in South Carolina, literally in second and third grade, you learn about slavery. Yeah, but what do you learn? Well, conveniently producing black friends is, alas, not surprising, but claiming she learned that the Civil War was a battle over slavery in second and third grade is. Ms. Haley attended a segregation academy, a type of private school established in the years after the Supreme Court's 1954 decision in Brown v. Board of Education by white parents who did not want their children attending school with black children. By 1975, the number of private schools in South Carolina grew more than tenfold, enrolling as many as 90% of the white children in some majority black counties. The Supreme Court eventually ruled that discrimination on the basis of race wasn't legal at private schools either, but even today, many segregation academies remain overwhelmingly white. Ms. Haley graduated in 1989 from Orangeburg Preparatory School. Orangeburg was the product of a merger between Wade Hampton and Willington Academy, also segregation academies. Hampton was named after one of the largest slaveholding families in South Carolina. At one point, the graduates of Hampton received Confederate flag lapel pins, which were meant to symbolize resistance to integration. The year Ms. Haley graduated, her high school yearbook featured at most a handful of black students. I attended a segregation academy too, Edgewood Academy in Elmore, Alabama, from first grade until I graduated in 1995. Though the town was about 30% black, none of the 33 people in my graduating class were. My parents say they sent my two younger brothers and me there because they thought we'd get a better education and because it was affordable. Annual tuition is now $6,210, which would have been roughly $2,000 the year I matriculated, an important consideration for the family, a family whose sole breadwinner was a lineman for Alabama Power. But an important side note here, very often, even if you do this without racist intent in the way that people did when they established these academies, very often the excuse later on was, well, you'll get a better education at one of these places. And that, of course, is because the idea of the segregation academies was to starve the local public schools of funding and participation. And you could starve the local public school of funding without guilt because your kids were going to be taken care of at the private schools. And you were only starving the local black population that was looking to the public schools for their education. See? So, but even if you do this, like I said, if you approach this without racist intent, if you can manage to get together the tuition, and you want your kids to have a good education, hey, I can't help it if local public education is terrible. That's just the way it is. And as one person, perhaps I can't fix that. You could spend your life crusading against it, but you probably have to get to work as a lineman for Alabama Power, you see. And you just say, well, it is the way it is right now, and we can sacrifice our kids' education to principle, or you can do what they did. When I was at Edgewood, she writes, there were no AP classes, no college test prep, and no real expectation that any of us would go to college unless we really wanted to, which for the girls would largely be to find husbands. And, that's not that long ago. Graduated in 1995. But by the way, just to give you a fuller picture of things, well, we don't want to sacrifice our kids' education. We think they'll get a better education here at the segregation academies, and they will, probably, in terms of the quality of the education. But mind you, that education would include no AP classes, no college test prep, and no real expectation that you'd even go to college. So it wasn't that much better. It was just better in the sense that you weren't in the worst possible underfunded public school, and you weren't alongside that many black people. And that was enough for them at the time. That convinced a lot of people, apparently. Well, the science teachers, apparently, she says, taught us creationism, and the principal used a big wooden paddle on misbehaving students, no matter how young or old they were. Our history textbooks, and here's the real point of including this piece, positioned the Civil War as a states' rights issue, a narrative that was reinforced by teachers, many of whom, as Ms. Haley suggests, did mention slavery, but said the idea that it was a root cause of the war was liberal propaganda. Sure. We were told that some slaves had good relationships with their owners and were grateful to be taken care of, as if they had been awarded cushy jobs with excellent benefits instead of being torn from their families, abused, and treated as if they were subhuman. We took field trips to the Confederate Memorial Park in Marbury, but not to the Civil Rights Memorial Center in Montgomery, which was the same distance from us. Geez, I wonder why. More on this next. All right, welcome back now to Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio as I take care of some additional frantic texting, although not necessarily related to the stream capabilities. But okay. We have to rejoin the piece I was reading about what it was like to go through education on the Civil War in one of the segregation academies in the Deep South. This one in Alabama, very similar to the situation Nikkki Haley would have gone through, apparently, in South Carolina. Although I do find it interesting that in South Carolina, she was attending, someplace that had been dubbed a preparatory academy, which was interesting given that the writers' school, she says, had no real expectation any of the people would go to college, although they didn't put preparatory academy in their name as far as I can tell. Because otherwise, preparatory to what? I don't know. But at any rate, we continue on with their discussion of, with her discussion of what sort of info she was getting in her grade school days. My 5th grade teacher, she says, told us that if Jesus had been alive in Alabama, all right, he would have been a white Dixiecrat, that God frowns on what she called race mixing, and that children who are the products of interracial marriages are to be pitied because they're mistakes. Yowza. Now, it adds parenthetically here, I wonder now how she would have treated me if she knew that I was the product of an interracial marriage, which as an adoptee, I found out only well after I graduated. So it was, thankfully, she was at least spared the concurrent trauma of hearing that. She had to look back and find out that was the case later on, and said, wow, I don't know. I wonder if she was happy that she didn't know at the time that she had teachers telling her that she was to be pitied and was a mistake. My goodness. Well, at any rate, I don't know which textbook Ms. Haley's school used, but I know just by virtue of the fact that she attended a segregation academy that her understanding of the Civil War was shaped by white teachers and administrators who were not inclined to grapple with the evils of slavery. When conservatives talk about education and indoctrination, I think of it as the most obvious kinds of projection. This is the interesting part. This actually is the part that grabbed me the most out of this because of my own refrain about every Republican accusation being a confession. Again, this is a big theme for Chris Rufo-style Republicans. We gotta take back our educational system because liberal Democrats and whoever else, communists, socialists, what have you, are indoctrinating our kids with liberal messaging. She notes that when conservatives talk about education and indoctrination, I think of it as the most obvious kind of projection because the environment in which I was educated was carefully constructed to give me the message that white conservative Christian Southerners were the true Americans chosen by God. My real education about American history happened at the public library, where my mother used to drop me off while she ran errands, and later in college. If you want to understand why evangelical conservatives are waging war on public libraries and universities, it's precisely because they expose kids to facts that undermine the kind of indoctrination I received. Once again, all accusations turn out to be confessions where Republicans are concerned. At the elementary school level, books that mention race, or in some cases simply include black protagonists, have been banned because they might cause white children discomfort. At the university level, activists like Christopher Rufo have labeled any frank discussion of race as critical race theory, a distortion that serves to, in Rufo's own words, make the topic toxic and contribute to negative perceptions. Many Republican politicians like to couch American history as an uninterrupted parade of greatness and righteousness. Without mention of the atrocities we committed along the way, they regard that perspective as a kind of patriotic optimism. That is their perspective, as a kind of patriotic optimism. But it's not. It is fragile and cynical. That perspective presumes that our nation will crumple under any scrutiny of the racist systems that persist. It suggests that the only way that we can be a great nation now is to delude ourselves into believing we are not inherently capable of evil. My view is more optimistic. I don't need to believe that America is unblemished and inherently good to believe in its potential and its ability to be better and stronger. If we cannot or will not do the sometimes uncomfortable work of reckoning with our past, America's destiny is small, mean, and weak. An unwillingness to tell the truth about the past serves only a shrinking number of Americans who wish to live within the distorted understanding of the world that segregation academies created for their students. An America only for some and with a very limited future. Very interesting perspective, I think, that also, like I said, expands on the note from the previous article about the Dunning School and where it came from and what it did. And, it doesn't make the connection directly here in the text, but it gives you some idea of how damaging it was to have scholarly work produced, or something that had the guise of scholarly work produced and sent forward into and forming the curriculum of so many schools in the South and elsewhere, and it still lingers in certain places. And I mean, at the time, you could point to his credentials, Dunning's credentials as a professor at Columbia University, and then, of course, all the credentials of all of his students heading out into the world to disseminate that view of the Civil War and the Reconstruction era, and having it embedded as what was taught in white schools all the way through segregation, and then what was taught in segregation academies after segregation, at least in public schools, theoretically ended. There's some good, I did do some additional reading, I think, I don't know whether it was in Wikipedia or elsewhere, or maybe it was in a linked article. Did the article about the committee offer links? I can't remember. Maybe I read through that description when he introduced the Dunning School here. I want to see if I can scroll down. No, there was no linked information here, so I must have just done some extra reading on the side about that. So one other piece I included, I think, in yesterday's roundup that I might as well read through here today, since we're kind of on the subject, was another way that Civil War history got distorted, though, and I can't recall now having read through this. I did read this one already, so I kind of know where it's going, but I can't remember whether they make specific mention of the Dunning School having been responsible in some way for this erasure. But this, a piece from December 20th, 2023 by Howell Raines. I mentioned it yesterday. Here's the Civil War history they don't want you to know, and I'm always intrigued by that sort of headline. Howell Raines, of course, former executive editor of the New York Times, is the author of Silent Cavalry, How Union Soldiers from Alabama Helped Sherman Burn Atlanta, then got written out of history. And it seems like he must eventually get around to the Dunning School in this one. I feel like that's where it came from. Let's read through it. Why not? We're doing a weird non-news, non-live show today. Maybe it's perfect timing. A new generation of Civil War scholars is filling in what one commentator calls the skipped history of white Southerners who fought for the Union Army. For me, the emerging revisionist account of the conflict is personal. I have discovered the story of a great-great-grandfather who was threatened with hanging as a, quote, damned old Lincolnite by his neighbors in the Alabama mountains. My given name is an anglicized version of the biblical name of James Hiel, I guess, Hiel Abbott. Okay. Hiel, as in Howell, I suppose. Howell Raines, Hiel Abbott, who died in 1877 after helping his son slip through rebel lines to enlist in the 1st Alabama Cavalry, a distinguished regiment of bluecoat fighters whose story was deliberately excluded from the Alabama Department of Archives and History in Montgomery. Now I recall how the connection was made, I guess, to the Dunning School here in this piece, so it will be fascinating when we get around to it, if we can. All right. So get that, right? A distinguished regiment of bluecoat fighters deliberately excluded from the Alabama Department of Archives and History in Montgomery. That son is buried in the National Military Cemetery at Chattanooga, Tennessee. Until a few years ago, I was among the thousands of Southerners who never knew they had kin buried under Union Army headstones. How did a regiment of 2,066 fighters and spies from the mountain south, chosen by General William Tecumseh Sherman as his personal escort on the march to the sea, get erased? It's interesting, too, because the selection seems calculated to make history and to in fact make history remember that this happened. So how could it get erased? Well, oddly, the explanation reaches back to Columbia University, whose pro-Confederate Dunning School of Reconstruction history at the start of the 20th century spread a false narrative of lost cause heroism and suffering among aristocratic plantation owners. Oh, boo-hoo, right? Well, there is a link here, by the way, to some Columbia University exhibits about the Dunning School, presumably written with an eye cast back on its inappropriateness. But at any rate, this is the information that I picked up over the weekend that I remember, so we don't have to go outside this article. As a 10-year-old, I understood the presence of Marie Bankhead Owen, who showed me and my all-white elementary school classmates the bullet holes in Confederate battle flags carried by, quote, our boys. So he has a similar experience here with education in the South. She and her husband, Thomas, I don't know, is it McAdory, maybe? M-C-A-D-O-R-Y. Thomas McAdory Owen reigned from 1901 to 1955 as directors of the archives in a monolithic alabaster building across from the Alabama state capitol. They made the decision not to collect the service records of an estimated 3,000 white Alabamians who enlisted in the Union Army after it occupied Huntsville, Alabama in 1862. Don't forget about that, right? Well, they wanted you to forget it. They just decided not to collect those service records. Let the voters decide, they said. Oh, wait a minute. Actually, these are 3,000 white Alabamians who had the right to vote even then, but let's decide not to let them decide anymore. The early loss of this crucial Tennessee river town, Huntsville, Alabama, occupied by the Union Army, was a stab to the heart from which the Confederacy never recovered. True, in the war, but neither did writing of accurate history in Alabama ever recover. The Owens were not alone in what was a national academic movement to play down the sins of enslavers. In the files in Montgomery, I found the century-old correspondence between Thomas Owen and Columbia University historian William Archibald Dunning about their mission to give a pro-Southern slant to the American Historical Association, the whole damn thing. They cooperated in Dunning's plan to hold the first AHA convention in a southern city, New Orleans. In 1903, Dunning chartered a train to bring northern professors to Montgomery, where Owen led them on a dramatic nighttime tour of the, quote, cradle of the Confederacy. It was a public relations coup for both men, cementing Dunning's hold on the historical profession and establishing Owen as a national leader in Civil War preservation, even though he was quite the opposite, as it turns out, for certain people, even certain white people. Later, at the 1909 AHA convention in New York, Dunning scored another political triumph by inviting W.E.B. Du Bois, mentioned previously, to be the first black Ph.D. holder to address the group. Then, sounds good, right? Well, so what happened? Well, then he organized a scholarly boycott of Du Bois' challenge to the Dunning School's white supremacist theory of Reconstruction, effectively blocking divergent points of view for several decades. All these events contributed to establishing what scholars call the myth of the lost cause, as a main theme of Civil War scholarship for the first half of the 20th century. The chief tenets of the myth were these. Of course, Southerners were solidly behind the Confederacy. It's interesting. Like, at least I thought, well, that might not be a myth. They might have been solidly behind the Confederacy, although I always heard, well, most people weren't slaveholders. What real reason did they have to fight for the Confederacy? We discussed that a little bit yesterday. The war was about states' rights, not slavery. Never really bought that one, of course. And African Americans, oh my, were scientifically proven to be a, quote, servile race. Wow. And, of course, lastly, Reconstruction was a failure because they were incapable of governing. Dunning died in 1922, but his scheme to put a Confederate spin on Civil War history worked all the way up until the 1960s Civil Rights Movement, when Du Bois' non-racist theory about the positive accomplishments of Reconstruction gained traction at last. The fact that few Americans have ever heard of the 1st Alabama Cavalry and the defiant anti-secession activist who led to its founding, Charles Christopher Sheets. No, never heard of him, right? Documents how such historiographic trickery produced what the Mellon Foundation calls, quote, a woefully incomplete story, unquote, of the American past. The Foundation's Monuments program is spending $500 million now to erect accurate memorials to political dissidents, women, and minorities who are underrepresented in many best-selling history books. By the way, Charles Christopher Sheets, Sheats, if you want to look him up. A place to start could be a statue of Sheets in the Alabama forest, where his Free State of Winston speech urged Alabama Unionists to secede from the Confederacy and sparked the surge of enlistments that led to the founding of the 1st Alabama Cavalry. His estimated audience of 2,000 to 3,000 mountain farmers was perhaps the largest anti-war rally held by patriotic Southerners. As a student, I heard tidbits about Sheets because he was born in 1839 in my mother's ancestral county, that Free State of Winston. Look it up. It's linked here. You can read a little bit about it. The county was one of 22 in central and northern Alabama that elected anti-secession delegates to the enslaver-dominated convention that took Alabama out of the Union on January 11th, 1861, by the unexpectedly close vote of 61 to 39. It has taken 6 decades of historical detective work to rescue an accurate biography of Sheets from the malicious lies in the few Alabama histories that mention him. At 21, he burst from political obscurity to defeat his county's most powerful plantation owner by a 5-1 margin for one of the 100 seats in the Montgomery Convention. There, the famous secessionist fire eater, William Lowndes Yancey, threatened to hang Sheets and the block of 24 Hill Country delegates, the whole delegation, who refused to sign the Ordinance of Secession to protest their non-slaveholding constituents being forced into a new nation they did not support. Sheets spent much of the war in prison, but escaped periodically to begin the clandestine recruitment campaign that led to the founding in 1862 of the 1st Alabama Union Cavalry. The campaign to erase Sheets and the 1st Alabama from the Civil War narrative was effective enough that I never knew that my great-great-grandfather Abbott ferried farm boys from Walker County, which adjoins Winston, the Free State of Winston, across the Sipsey River so that they could sneak north, to enlist with Union forces that had occupied Huntsville in 1862. Federal archives recount how Abbott kept a canoe on the fast-flowing Sipsey to send potential recruits on their dangerous journeys through the Confederate lines to 1st Alabama enlistment stations in Huntsville and Corinth, Mississippi. They fled rebel recruitment squads singly or in groups of up to 100. So great was the influx that in 1862, General Carlos Buell got Abraham Lincoln's permission to organize the Alabama Volunteers into their own regiment. And by the way, now it makes me curious, as it did the other day when I read it, to look into the background of General Carlos Buell. Just sort of interested about that. The fact that their story is missing from the best-known Civil War histories provides dramatic proof of why modern doctoral students are only now establishing a new pantheon of loyal individuals and groups. The backstory of how Confederate history was written to glorify the defeated side is complicated and requires a dip into academic historiography and plantation economics. It's also full of odd twists. Dunning was the son of a wealthy New Jersey industrialist, in case you were wondering, who taught him that Southern plantation masters were unfairly punished during Reconstruction. The younger Dunning installed a white supremacist curriculum at Columbia. I thought maybe he was originally from the Deep South and plantation-holding folk who found his way to Columbia and then New Jersey. Okay. Although southern New Jersey and Delaware remained a slave state and part of the Union, we tend to forget about that, though it hasn't been entirely erased. And southern New Jersey, pretty agrarian, probably held a lot of the same sympathies. Anyway, the younger Dunning installed a white supremacist curriculum at Columbia, and after 1900 started dispatching his doctoral students to set up pro-Confederate history departments at southern universities. The most influential of these was Walter Linwood Fleming, whose students at Vanderbilt University produced I'll Take My Stand, a celebration of plantation culture written by 12 brilliant, if wrong, conservative agrarian writers, including Robert Penn Warren, Alan Tate, and Andrew Nelson Lytle, perhaps, Lytle. My research showed that Lytle knew about the Free State of Winston, but chose instead in his popular book, Nathan Bedford Forrest and His Critter Company, if you were wondering what kind of book that was, to lionize the sociopathic cavalry general who executed an integrated federal force of freed black slaves and white Unionists as they tried to surrender at Fort Pillow, Tennessee in 1864. That was his preferred focus. Little's mentor, Fleming, who was born on an Alabama plantation, reigned as the director of graduate education at Vanderbilt and peopled Southern history departments with PhDs schooled in the pro-Confederate views that he learned from Dunning at Columbia. The other background factor was King Cotton economics, as it developed in the Black Belt lands of the frontier South. After 1830, the best farm acreage was bought up by the wealthy owners of Atlantic seaboard plantations who brought slavery and their own aristocratic pretensions into the new states like Alabama. Poorer farmers had to settle for small farms in the Appalachian foothills. They could not afford enslaved people, and their unionism had deep historical roots. It wasn't just that, they were resentful of the plantation owners and didn't own slaves. The original Highland homesteaders revered the old flag that their forefathers had fought for in the Revolution and the War of 1812. Most of the some 100,000 future Union volunteers from the South, get that number, 100,000, were Jacksonian Democrats who hewed to Old Hickory's 1830 dictum that the Union, quote, must be preserved. Keep that in mind, of course, every time the today's modern Republicans tell you, well, Democrats are the real racists. After all, Southern Democrats were the secessionists who fought in the Civil War, which you now, of course, glorify and can't get enough of, which is contradictory enough. But remember that, and much of the quote-unquote Old South, it turns out that they were, yes, Democrats, Jacksonian Democrats, and he's no great shakes to be sure, but in terms of their loyalty to the Union versus the Confederacy, apparently it was pretty clearly with the Union, and had no interest in slavery as an institution, even if they were racist against Native Americans. That's true. You can't forget or forgive that. But hey, there's more nuance and complication to it than we were told. Lost cause historians, schooled by Dunning and Fleming, simply glossed over the fact that white volunteers from the Confederate States made up almost 5% of Lincoln's army. 5% is not a huge number, but it's not inconsiderate, right? The great achievement, of Dunning and the lost cause historians of his Dunning School was to create the impression that the vast majority of white Southerners supported the Confederacy, even though 2/3 of Alabama families did not own enslaved people. That fact got through to me, that the vast majority of Southern families didn't. Southern whites did not own slaves. Not because they were necessarily philosophically opposed to it, but because they simply couldn't afford it. But that fact got through to me. But yeah, that did sort of get translated. I do remember it being translated into, that must mean that they fought for the Confederacy because of beliefs in the states' rights issues, after all. I mean, there were some. It was the right to keep slaves, but, there were some. But, there were also several 100,000 who actually fought for the other side, regardless. Plus, of course, we didn't really spend any time. We didn't have time for it in the high school curriculum talking about who went to the secession conventions in each of the states. And was the vote unanimous? No, it wasn't. And what does that mean? This is very interesting. Good thing to have this brought up. White support for the war peaked after the attack on Fort Sumter in 1861, but steadily declined after the Union victory at Shiloh in the spring of 1862. So how then did the Civil War become the only conflict in which, as filmmaker Ken Burns told me, the losers got to write the history, erecting statues of Johnny Reb outside seemingly every courthouse in Alabama, even the ones where the majority of the population was against it, right? Long story short, after the Compromise of 1877 ended Reconstruction, plantation oligarchs regained control of Southern legislatures, and state universities started churning out history books that ignored black people and poor whites. When national historians set about writing widescreen histories of the war, they relied on these tainted histories. Well, there's much more to it, not that much more, and certainly enough you could read through it on your own. We will take a short break and come back and speak with Joan next.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
Yeah, we've had terrible weather.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. The weather continues to keep us off the live stream, and that's where our Netroots Radio hub is based in the Pacific Northwest. And Joan McCarter is here to tell us the weather is not very good there, and that's probably part of the reason. Can't be helping, certainly.
Power has been out for a lot of people all over Portland, anyway.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess, ice storm on its way?
This was high winds over the weekend, and lots and lots and lots of trees toppled, taking down power lines. And today we get the follow-up of freezing rain.
Oh, fun.
My power held, so keep your fingers crossed that it still does.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because
we had a mini ice storm
that could take you out
on the ground when a water main broke half a block away, and so now my street's a lake.
Cool,
a frozen pond.
Yeah, that'll happen too, right? You know, the extreme temperatures will take out the aging plumbing infrastructure everywhere, but in your house, if it's old enough, under the streets, why not? Sure. And a water main break in freezing temperatures is always a great thing to deal with. Okay. Well, that explains, that's the word I had gotten from Justice about things. And so we're not live streaming, but we're recording nonetheless. And I can't wait to put out the podcast so everyone can catch up. Of course, I've been waiting for this segment because I realized, as the show started today, we were, I guess, distracted by, the meaningless Iowa caucuses, because that's all that the newspapers were really offering us with coverage of that. And then I thought, hey, I forget how we left things. There was a government shutdown coming. Then they reached a deal, or they said they had a deal. And then, of course, the Republican reactionaries refused to go along with the deal, and then threats were being made, and even Marjorie Taylor Greene saying, well, I'll use the motion to vacate the chair, which I just blew past when she did it. Like, oh, of course she's threatening to do that. She's been threatening. Yeah. She wanted that forever. And then but then it struck me, oh yeah, but she was on the other side when Kevin McCarthy's chair was at stake. She had signed on with the leadership, I guess, in the hopes of becoming a serious person, or being taken seriously anyway, and maybe climbing in leadership. And then the rug got pulled out from underneath her, along with dumping Kevin McCarthy. And so now she's ready to dump whoever's next. And I forgot that she wasn't among the reactionary, revolutionary wackadoodles last time. She was just an independent wackadoodle.
In fact, her support for McCarthy got her booted from the Freedom Caucus.
Right. So now, of course, she's, I don't know whether she's trying to get back in with them, or just trying to take revenge on them, or just doesn't know what else to yell about.
Trying to find relevance.
Yeah. I'm thinking it's just sort of like, well, yeah, maybe I'll get back to yelling at everybody and being nobody's friend, which, that was her natural constituency, nobody. But
yes,
I guess she's just most comfortable operating there. But yeah, and then I looked away, and where are we? It's like
where we are now is Johnson pitched yesterday a short-term continuing resolution.
Right. We're not going to do those. Okay, I'll do those.
Into March. No, we're not going to do any more of them. Actually, another bifurcated one, another two-step one, which Schumer is there are going to be enough Senate stragglers coming in today, I guess, for them to have a session. So Schumer's going to start the clock running on this. Over on the other side, they are not coming in today because too many people are too far flung and the weather's too bad.
Okay.
And it's complicated even more for Johnson in that Hal Rogers, the dean of the House, got in a car accident last week and has been hospitalized and is not expected back in this week.
Okay, so with that
which
narrow
means
margin,
there are 218 Republican votes in the House right now.
Yeah, so the maximum, if everybody turns up and votes and you lose no votes, then you can still guarantee a win on things, because 218 will be a majority even if the House is full. But, in the normal course of things, 6 to 8 Republicans are just not there for various reasons.
Right.
And, so, Yikes.
So math is going to be a big thing this week.
I guess.
And I have the hardest time figuring out Congress math, so I'm not looking forward to it. It's like, okay, you subtract from there, add to there, which means I hate it.
Yeah, it makes things real complicated and difficult and weird math. Well, no one wants any math at all, really. If we can avoid having it at all. But, okay. So now I know what the trouble is. And, I hadn't heard about Hal Rogers.
That's not even the beginning of the trouble.
I guess there's more. Oh, please tell me. I hadn't heard about Hal Rogers is all I meant there. But, okay, so more trouble. Good, let's hear it.
The more trouble is... Well, everything. They don't want the short-term resolution, or the short-term funding resolution. They want a long one. They want it to go all year if they have to have one, so that the spending cuts absolutely, definitely kick in. The ones that were agreed to by McCarthy and Biden back in May. Remember how we thought that they had gamed it so the Freedom Caucus would lose in that deal?
Okay.
They kind of gave it away in subsequent continuing resolutions by restoring funding to the Pentagon, even if the sequester isn't hit. I hate these terms. I hate this. Anyway, in the budget deal they agreed to in May, they said, okay, we will start making cuts in April if we don't have a budget for this fiscal year by then. And they made sure that they were across the board cuts so that the Defense Department would hurt as badly as everything else. But in subsequent continuing resolutions, they kind of fiddled with that, and Pentagon has all its money. But everything else could be cut by as much as 30%.
Yeah, and I can see when they sell these things, they usually say, "Well, we'll do it across the board," and because nobody wants to see that happen, another one of those situations. That's the disciplinary measure. This is what will keep people working. And on a real solution, no one wants to see the Defense Department cut, even though lots of people do want to see the Defense Department cut, but no serious people. And so that's the backup mechanism to keep people at the table. And then what they do is they come to the table and say, "Can we cut out this part that keeps us coming back to the table?" Yes? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. All right. And then what's supposed to happen? Nobody at the table? I don't know. We're not here at the table to answer you. So, and then the government shuts. Or, okay. So, the conservatives wanted to lock in things, or no? It was the long-term CRs. Whose idea was that?
The conservatives want this.
It is. All right. I do understand it. Okay.
The Freedom Caucus actually wants this. They will support a continuing resolution as long as it goes all year.
Okay.
Because then those cuts start coming into other programs.
I see. Okay. So, because that is it's a departure from
feed
usual.
all the babies that they're insisting people have.
That's your fault. Your problem. Feed them yourself. Okay. Well, yeah, they've never been particularly consistent about that. But it is a little bit of a different approach. Well, I guess it depends on the circumstances each time, but I recall sometimes these kind of radical Republicans enjoyed having multiple rounds to fight over, so they preferred short-term CRs. But I guess now they're getting sick of dealing with it, and
if they have a longer one, it forces cuts.
Yeah, if they
that's the only way they're going to get those cuts.
Yeah, so now they've stumbled onto that tactic, and so have switched their what has often been their position. There was no ideological reason for it really, except it gave them a chance to make trouble more often. But now they say, well, we can make worse trouble for poor people for a longer amount of time, and that's actually more satisfying than annoying otherwise relatively well-off Democrats here in Washington.
Pretty much.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I think I can grasp where they're coming from.
Related to this kind of, Johnson is still playing Ukraine and immigration against this funding bill. He's still trying to curry favor with the far right, with the crazies, with the Freedom Caucus, whoever, by saying, we'll just do this, but we won't do any other funding until we get HR2, our horrible immigration bill. That's our line in the sand. We won't do anything for Ukraine. We won't do anything with what the Senate is plotting on immigration, the bill that the Senate's trying to come up with.
Something more.
So that's how he's trying to appease them, which you can't.
You can't appease them. Yeah, okay.
And even though this is supposedly what Marjorie Taylor Greene is threatening him over, it's immigration and border stuff.
And so he offers it, and she says,
if we don't get HR2, if you don't force Chuck Schumer and the whole Senate to pass HR2 and President Joe Biden to sign it, I'm going to do a motion to vacate, essentially.
Okay. Yeah, right. And I mean, there's just, by what mechanism do I force the other house to do what I want? None. So, can't help you.
That part just doesn't register with them.
Yeah, I mean they
this is how government works,
right? I mean, even though you can show them I'm just a bill and all that, and say, I mean, they've passed HR2 in the House. They just want it to pass elsewhere, and if it doesn't, then something they get rid of him, and he says, all right, I mean, I guess pick anybody you want. It's it's the Speaker of the House. I can't make the Senate pass the thing, not to mention what happens to it. Even if the Senate did pass it for some strange reason, in terms of getting it signed,
amended,
we've done what we can. Oh, yeah, I guess that's true, too. And, all right, well, that doesn't matter to them, of course. They don't. They know that people don't care. Their constituents don't care about how things actually work. They just, I made a stink. In order to make a problem.
I honestly do believe that a good chunk of them don't understand how it works themselves.
I guess
they know their constituents
likely
don't
true.
And aren't going to learn and don't care.
Well, they're certainly not going to learn if they don't know.
And I think it's kind of true of some of them as well.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I could imagine that there are some Republicans walking around saying, I don't understand, why isn't H.R. 2 happening? We passed it. Well, there's this whole thing about the other body and presidents signing things, and I'm just a bill. I'm only a bill, right? All right. So that's what they're holding out over, and it doesn't make any sense. And they might vacate the chair as well.
And it's just so dangerous. It is just so dangerous.
I was thinking after we spoke last time about, maybe it was in between, just sort of thinking about, the fact that they are, of course, sacrificing aid to Ukraine over this, and just how interesting it is that conservative Republicans have come to the place, and how we've gotten there over the years of we'll show you what we really want is to get out of Russia's way in their agenda of conquest. Well, that used to be part of the Republican agenda was stopping that, but then things went a little screwy. But I was just sort of thinking about, again, how Kevin McCarthy and his now being out, and somebody else probably, maybe being forced out similarly, and thinking once again about the forgotten aspect of McCarthy's blurting out in the taped conversation. Well, I think, Putin pays Trump. Yeah. And of course, that getting all the attention, and I keep trying to bring people back to it. This was a conversation about Ukraine and the Republican responsibility to provide aid to Ukraine in its fight against Russia. And the entire conversation is the Republican leadership coming together, but an interesting angle of it being most of them patting themselves on the back and saying, but we're the only ones that recognize the problem and we're helping. And of course now they're not, but even then, Kathy McMorris Rogers saying, but we're not, we're not doing anything. That might be our responsibility, but we're not doing it. And then the whole thing blows up after McCarthy says, well, I think Putin is paying Trump. But the epilogue here being, 5 years, a couple years down the road, I guess now 8 years down the road,
8 years, yeah.
The Republican position after blurting out, Putin's paying Trump, or at least so I would believe. Now the entire Republican Party is pro-Putin. So you start to wonder, well, was McCarthy right? Or was McCarthy complaining, hey, how come we're not getting paid by Putin? Or maybe if we start doing his thing. But at the time, of course, they were all saying, no, we need to stand against Russia. And it only took a couple of years, even after blurting out the possible truth there about it, or at least, what appeared to be happening in their view. It is odd that the Republican Party a couple of years later would say, that's not a bad position to be taking, whether we're getting paid for it or not. And here we are. Okay. But I understand there's new pins, so that's good news.
There are new pins, yes.
I happen to have seen that in scrolling through your diaries here, the stories that you've... this actually was
new
a
pins.
Thing? New pins. Okay, so members wear those lapel pins that get them...
They have their new lapel pins. The lapel pins are actually
they're
real
functional.
Thing.
Yeah. They get you through security.
Taken on in recent years a larger security feature, need for Capitol Police to be able to identify them quickly for protecting them and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They were also a liability on January 6th.
Right. You had to take those off so you could hide.
About all of them ever saying, take off your pins, so they can't identify you.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about the likelihood of the people storming the Capitol understanding those pins.
Knowing. Well, some of them would have.
They might have gotten them along with their maps, right? Look for these pins. That could be. Yes. That's true. Zip tie anybody with one of these on. Something like that. Okay, so they designed themselves some new pins, and they are very excited about that. I mean, this is...
I think because the ones that they had originally designed were green, and I think that probably some of the not so green members of the Republican Party thought that was sending some kind of message.
I see. Okay.
About Joe Biden's climate policies or something. I don't know.
Oh,
but anyway, they didn't like green, so
they changed the blue.
That's one story. The other story is that somehow, even though 435 are all that are made, they think there are extra ones out there somehow. So they think the official story is that somehow they got compromised, so they needed new ones.
Okay. Interesting. I mean,
only 435 of them are actually struck ever. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Although, I mean, like, there's no like microchip in them or anything. So, like, you see the thing. If you wanted to make one and disguise this is not recommended for anybody. But I guess if you wanted to make one and disguise yourself as a member of Congress or whatever, I don't know what the hell. But I mean, there's no reason you couldn't just say, well, take a photograph. Here's what it looks like. Go make one. So it's possible someone has done that.
It is possible.
I don't know whether there's any. I mean, I guess I could certainly see a certain number of them saying green. Why? This is a plot to do something. Da 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 da. I mean, the design is not particularly innovative or anything, and the only thing that typically changes, besides minor details or occasionally the background color, making it green means nothing except like when you get your car inspection sticker. This year is, the ones are yellow.
Right.
And just make it easy for
Makes
scanning.
It easier. Yeah. You can look at it and say, oh, that's this year's.
Right. It's not an old one. This person doesn't have to go get their emissions inspected, whatever. Okay, this is for the 118th Congress, is the green one.
And that's what changes. They put the new number on it.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, all right. So they made a very innovative design, more or less exactly the same thing, except in blue, and some more
Pretty
stars.
Much. Yeah.
Great. Okay. And it took them a year to get that done.
It took a year to decide on the design.
So we'll probably fund the government real quick. Everything, the rest of the thing, all the complicated stuff, I'm sure we'll do very quickly if the pins took a year. This is just an interesting side note.
I think we can entirely forget about having a budget for 2025.
Yeah.
So it's going to make, it's going to be a really, really interesting October.
Yeah.
With the election in.
To say the least. So.
And another continuing resolution that will be based on FY 23 members.
Yeah. Well, okay. I mean, they never got their act together. And what can you do? You could just hope that the control is finally wrested away from them. The odds don't look like it, thanks to various factors, including gerrymandering. But okay. Yeah.
And some other situation that's kind of worrisome is the increasing freedom caucasification. Is that a word? Of the Senate.
Oh, yeah. Well, the Senate is fed by the House, and eventually all the problems like that leak over into them.
You got Mark Wayne Mullen there now.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well, that's increasingly been the case, way back when in olden times, and I guess 90s and earlier. The majority of senators tended to be the previous governors of the states, or I don't know, just came from other sources.
People.
Well, yes,
yeah.
for better or for worse, but eventually, it's funny because it seems like a natural progression now. And we've gotten used to it. And it's not like it was never the case that House members would step up, look for a promotion, essentially, into the Senate. And in some states that was easier to do. Smaller states, if you represented a larger chunk of the state, you made a name for yourself, you could make that move. But yeah, generally tended to be more serious statewide elected officials or people who had gained their fame elsewhere running for Senate. And now, increasingly, since the Newt Gingrich days, really, it was a matter of moving, particularly for Republicans, radical right-wing Republicans stepping up and trying to achieve statewide office there. And then they get to the Senate, which is supposed to work differently, but they end up, this is where you get people who are blocking all of, even though Tommy Tuberville never came from the House, but the idea of, radical use of the rules and blocking entire departments from having any of their appointments approved, or filibustering entire, sometimes an entire agenda, and saying, oh, we're just going to filibuster every bill that comes up and make everything require 60 votes. So, yeah, it's been underway for a long time, except now it comes from the Freedom Caucus instead of GOPAC, I guess.
Here's another reason why it's really important to win the Senate back.
Yes.
Because it will be Joe Manchin-less. And maybe, just maybe this time around, we can get rid of the filibuster. We can show
would be great.
Exactly what's been happening to the Senate. They can see that, oh yeah, the Freedom Caucus is taking over the Republican Party, so we got to shut that down.
Right. So, I mean, hopefully,
it's really interesting to see the Senate start to look more like the House with these Freedom Caucus types, and the House to look more like the Senate when the Freedom Caucus types keep doing essentially a filibuster.
Yeah, interesting.
Locking up the House by refusing to vote on procedural stuff, moving bills to the floor.
Yeah. Well, a reminder that among the foot draggers, even among Democrats on issues of filibuster reform, used to tell us, well, that you don't want to turn the Senate into the House. Well, we're not turning the Senate into the House. They're turning the Senate into the House, and by the way, turning the House into the Senate at the same time. So, this is I'm sorry, but this is a partisan tactic here, and it's preventing you from operating the government. It's preventing you from keeping a stable speakership in the House. These are all incredibly impactful negative effects, and a lot of them grow out of this same tactic. And time for you to fess up and help get it out of the way.
Also, to stop approving every single flag officer promotion in the military.
Right. I mean, that will, I think, remain in memory for a while. I mean, Americans do tend to forget about stuff, but that one made an impression on the consciousness.
It
at least
certainly
briefly
did among senators. That one is a possible one and it's just such a waste of time for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's rare for them to give up leverage and power, but that one was pretty embarrassing. And they've known for a long time. We don't look really all that closely at certainly at lower level promotions, but that does fall to us to do, and we wouldn't want to give away that leverage until now. But they might expedite that process at some point and get some agreement on that. But yeah, that was very embarrassing for them, and might occasion a change in the rules at some point.
It might. It really did. Because it was extreme for the Senate. I mean, the Senate's been through a lot of crazy things, and they've seen a lot of ridiculousness out of Republicans. But this was different.
Yeah,
because
that really did move them to the brink.
Every officer, every flag officer in the military, and it was really serious. It was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people.
Yeah.
And it was a compounding problem because as the calendar moved on, more people fell into it. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it was so it got to be a perfect storm. And of course, once people started calling Tuberville out on it, I mean, I guess it might have gone on longer if they had had a more effective spokesperson for this aggressive tactic, but they had Tuberville, and he
had no allies.
There
but
was
at the
no
same
chance.
time, it feels to me like McConnell could have ended it sooner had McConnell been stronger. I think McConnell is losing power in the Senate.
Yes, well,
and I think that's a reflection of it. I could be completely wrong. He could have been giving rein to Tuberville to do this, but it didn't feel like it.
Difficult to tell, and I mean that's more in keeping with the general feeling of things. He's aging. The composition of the Senate caucus or conference in the in the Senate is changing, as you noted. They're not his people largely, and right, and he's just probably lacking in the energy to either make them his people or compensate for the fact that they're not his people. So,
right, and he's had his serious health concerns.
Right,
whatever's been going on with the freezing up. So there can't be a whole lot of confidence in him in the conference. So anyway, that's a fun thing to end on. Right.
Well, certainly something we have to keep an eye on. Now, so with nothing in place and nothing guaranteed, we are scheduled, like the first part of the shutdown is supposed to come like now, is it not? At
Friday.
The end of Friday. So, is there any prospect for them short-term kicking it on and getting agreement with it, or do we just anticipate?
They're gonna, if nothing gets attached to it, Democrats will help pass it.
Okay. All right.
And Mike Johnson will face a motion to vacate because Democrats won't pass it.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like he's perfectly willing to risk that, and it may very well be the case that it's a bluff being called, and they're like, you know what, we're just not going through this again. We'll just register our anger with him and nothing else, and he may know that. He may be smart enough to figure that out. But if not, and they boot him out, okay. I guess we'll sit and watch that.
Here we go again.
Yeah.
Gives me something fun to do.
Right. Keeps the interest up. Okay. Well, thank you very much for checking in with us. And I guess we'll have some answer about what the real Republican reaction is next week. Look forward to checking in with you then. All right. Take care, Joan. Thanks a lot.
Radio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
And more importantly, with Joan McCarter, of course, senior political writer over at Daily Kos. I never just call out the title anymore and give her due. But, all right, well, we'll do that one today. And now we'll see what happens when we kick things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. We'll see what's working and what's not. And we'll be streaming, I hope, tomorrow.